I call this meeting of the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriations Subcommittee to order. Before we begin, I want to remind members we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups, including amendments, motions, other unanimous consent requests, and so on. That email address has been provided to your staff. I would remind all members that they must verbally request unanimous consent separately from sending a written UC request to the email address. And with that, let me proceed to my opening remarks. First of all, I just want to start by saying that how much of a pleasure it is to be working with Ranking Member Cole. And that's not just this year, but over the past 6 years. And I would just say that it's the mutual concerns, the mutual understanding that what this subcommittee can do, but even more importantly, what the Congress can do in helping to families in this country have a better chance at a better life. And I think that that has been the foundation of a partnerships. And we have been a partner on the Labor HHS Subcommittee. So I'm so appreciative of my colleagues' friendship and working forward. I also want to just say that what an honor it is to work with all of my colleagues on the subcommittee, on both sides of the aisle. Your devotion and commitment to this nation is clear. This year, the subcommittee received 15,000 funding requests from Democrats and Republicans. We were able to meet the vast majority of them either fully or partially. And together, I believe we have done great work, and so I very much appreciate your dedication and the tireless efforts of our front office and our personal office staff. Over the past 5 months, the Labor, Health, and Human Services Education and Related Agencies Subcommittee, better known as Labor H, has held a total of 14 hearings, as well as a public roundtable with the director and the deputy director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We discussed the vital issues and challenges, many of which have plagued our nation for years, but which have been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We learned how our public health infrastructure was not up to meeting the demands that the COVID-19 pandemic required and how much work is needed to rebuild it. We heard how many health departments and labs still use fax machines to communicate, how local and state health departments have lost more than 20% of their workforce since 2008, and how many labs are not sufficiently supplied with the equipment that they need. We learned how important it is to provide increased funding for basic biomedical research at the National Institutes of Health. As you all know, this very research was integral in setting the stage for the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines, which would not have been possible without the years of sustained investments made by the Congress. In addition to the many issues we discussed related to our public health infrastructure, we also examined the devastating impact of the child care crisis and how families across our nation are still struggling to obtain the safe, affordable support they need. We heard about our nation's most urgent behavioral health crisis and how the pre-existing mental health and opioid use crises have worsened dramatically over the past year. We learned how many Americans, including children, are reporting increased rates of suicidal ideation and substance abuse. We discussed better ways to help those experiencing mental health crises by sending mental health professionals rather than law enforcement to their aid. And we saw the terrible effects that the maternal health crisis has and continues to have on our nation's mothers, especially those within communities of color. From ensuring the safety of our nation's agricultural workers and those with mental health conditions, to the strengthening of our nation's education, labor, and public health institutions, the work we do on this subcommittee touches on so many aspects of the American people's lives, giving them the critical tools they need for their families to be healthy and safe. With this bill's $253.8 billion in funding, a historic increase of 28% above last year. We are bringing hope to the individuals, communities, and regions that need it most, and providing crucial funding to build a better tomorrow and expand our capacity to meet any future challenges. We are beginning to fulfill our debt to generations, families, and communities that require this scale of investment. And we are beginning to tip the scales for the hardworking middle class and the vulnerable. With $7.4 billion for Child Care and Development Block Grant, $12.2 billion for Head Start, $450 million for preschool development grants, we are cultivating a nation that supports working families and nurtures our children. We make a historic investment in K-12 education by meeting President Biden's commitment to more than double funding for Title I grants to a new level of $36 billion, an increase of nearly $20 billion to strengthen federal support for high-poverty schools and high-quality education for all students. We all know how education can serve as a great equalizer that opens doors and opportunities for jobs, higher wages, and a better life. But we know that it can only serve as this great equalizer if, and only if, it is affordable, accessible, and achievable for all. Which is why I'm also proud of the serious investments made in this bill to make post-secondary education more affordable for students with low incomes, with a $400 increase made to the maximum Pell Grant, the foundation of our student aid system. We give students a fighting chance at the American dream and a brighter future. I'm also proud of the $1.13 billion this bill provides for programs serving historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions, community colleges, and under-resourced institutions of higher education. As young adults move into the workforce, the increase of $1.6 billion provided in this bill for the Employment and Training Administration, including a total of $285 million for registered apprenticeships and $3.1 billion for the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Grant Act and state grants that will enrich our nation's workforce and expand access to good jobs. In addition, this bill provides $2.1 billion, an increase of $305 million for worker protection agencies such as OSHA and the Wage and Hour Division. These investments will go a long way in protecting workers' paychecks and benefits and ensuring the safety and the health of our workforce. These investments across the Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill will sustain good-paying American jobs, give more people a better shot at the American dream. But even as we work to foster greater opportunity for more Americans, we must also learn from the lessons of the pandemic and work to rebuild our public health infrastructure while preparing to address the public health crises of the future. The bill makes historic investments to rebuild our public health system after the worst pandemic in a century, including $1 billion for new flexible funding stream for public health infrastructure and capacity, and an increase of $250 million for CDC's global health efforts. We provide increases of $50 million for public health workforce and career development to invest in essential public health workers who protect our communities and are empowered by science. We provide $100 million for public health data modernization to advance the transformation of the collection and utilization of public health data from retrospective reporting to driving action in real time. I'm also pleased that the bill continues to build on the investments this committee has made over the past 6 years in biomedical research by increasing funding for the National Institutes of Health by $6.5 billion, including an increase of $3.5 billion for basic biomedical research at existing NIH institutes and centers. It also includes sufficient funding to provide an across-the-board increase of no less than 5% for each institute and center. In this bill, we also provide $3 billion to support the President's request to establish the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or ARPA-H, to accelerate the pace of scientific breakthroughs that have the potential to transform healthcare and address our most complex health challenges. And it's modeled after the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA. ARPA-H will invest in large, high-risk, high-reward research projects that have the potential to achieve breakthroughs in the treatment of diseases such as cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. To help address the rising mental health crisis in this country, which has been profoundly exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, this bill provides $100 million to help communities create a new mental health crisis response partnership pilot program. This program would divert calls from those experiencing mental health crises from law enforcement to behavioral health teams and ensure these individuals get the care that they need. And many of these programs are in partnership with our law enforcement agency and come directly out of the suggestions made by one of the hearings where we discussed mental health and law enforcement. Additionally, the bill provides a total of $50 million for gun violence prevention research at CDC and NIH, which will build on the important investment we have made over the past 2 years. The COVID-19 pandemic laid bare a slew of disparities and failures that left vulnerable populations in the lurch, and it has underscored the need to work not only for equality, but also for equity in healthcare access and treatment. That is why I'm especially proud that this bill advances equal treatment for women, not only by increasing funding for the range of health services, including family planning covered by Title X, but also by repealing the discriminatory Hyde Amendment. I know that this is an issue on which many of us disagree. But regardless of the original intent of Hyde, it has disproportionately impacted women of color, and it has ultimately led to more unintended pregnancies and later, riskier and more costly abortions. Quite frankly, allowing the Hyde Amendment to remain on the books is a disservice not only to our constituents, but also to the values that we espouse as a nation. We are finally doing what is right for our mothers, our families, our communities, by striking this discriminatory amendment once and for all. I am immensely proud of what we have accomplished in this bill. Through the funding provided here, we are building the architecture for the future and using this moment to lift up our nation's most vulnerable so that every person, no matter their background or where they live, has the opportunity to contribute and to succeed. And with that, I want to again thank Ranking Member Cole and the staffs on both sides of the aisle for their hard work. Specifically, I want to say thank you to our Majority Clerk, Stephen Stegleiter, his team, Jared Bass, Philip Tizani, Jennifer Kama, Jackie Gilroy, Lori McNone, Becky Saleh, and Tricia Castaneda. Thank you as well to the minority staff, Susan Ross and Catherine Salmon. And last but not least, I must thank my personal staff, including Liz Albertine, Christian Lovell, Caitlin Peruccio, and Marie Gualtieri. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee who is with us virtually today, Congresswoman Kay Granger, for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the chair for presenting the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Bill. Chair DeLauro unveils this bill today as the leader of our full committee and the subcommittee. I know she has worked extremely hard to have the opportunity to hold both of these positions, and I have great respect for her dedication to these issues. I also want to thank Mr. Cole, who serves as both the vice ranking member of the full committee and the ranking member of this subcommittee. I appreciate Tom's ability to find common ground when it's necessary, but also to clearly highlight when the parties disagree. I need to begin my remarks today by noting concerns that he and I share about this year's labor HHS bill. This bill, like several other bills we've seen brought before this committee, is based on a top-line funding level that only the majority party has agreed to. This bill includes an unprecedented increase that is nearly 40% more than last year. This is simply too high, especially when many programs in this bill have already received billions of dollars over the past year from COVID spending bills. Quite frankly, I do not believe these federal agencies have the capacity to manage this amount of funding over such a short amount of time. I question whether the proper oversight can be performed. This morning, we're beginning our last day of subcommittee markups, and we do not have much time left before the end of the fiscal year. I fear that continuing to pursue these unrealistic spending levels without bipartisan buy-in could leave all of government in a continuing resolution in October. That said, this incredibly high price tag of this bill is not the only problem with this bill. For the first time in nearly 50 years, this bill abandons long-standing bipartisan language that prevents federal tax dollars being used to pay for abortions. This bill also removes language carried from the last 16 years that protects American doctors and nurses from being forced to participate in abortions. This is the first time such an extreme position has been taken in this bill, and this shift in policy could actually destroy decades of bipartisan work. Unless this long-standing compromise protecting human life is restored, this bill should not move forward. My colleagues and I are going to have to strongly oppose it because it is out of step with the views of most Americans. It is just that simple. There are many other highly controversial items included in the bill today that must also be addressed, including language relating to labor law, excessive spending on new unauthorized programs, and provisions relating to immigration enforcement. Madam Chair, Republicans stand ready to discuss top-line spending levels and funding for the individual programs that will help improve the health and lives of the American people. But restoring language that protects the lives of unborn children and protects Americans from being forced to participate with their skills or with their tax dollars is what they believe to be the taking of innocent life must be the first step. This is the only way to get our appropriations bills through the House and the Senate and signed into law. There will be an amendment later this week to restore the bipartisan language and hope that it will be agreed to before the bill proceeds to the House floor. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thanks, the gentlelady, and now I would like to turn to Ranking Member Cole for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Before I go to my prepared remarks, my staff brought something to my attention this morning that I wanted to share with the committee, which was an article in the Hill magazine reporting on the Lugar Center, a very respected center, which rated all the committees in Congress for their quality of oversight. So they gave them an A to an F grade. I want to read the following: the best performing, there we go. The best performing committee was the House Committee on Appropriations, chaired by Representative Rosa DeLauro, Democrat, Connecticut. According to the Lugar Center's formula, the panel received a score of 184%, was followed by the Senate Finance, led by Senator Ron Wyden, with a score of 136. So you didn't beat them by a little, you beat them by a lot. And I just want to compliment you and your leadership and frankly, all of my fellow committee members. We may not always agree on everything, but I'm very proud of this committee and the way in which it operates and the willingness of members to spend the time and do the job under your leadership and under the leadership of our ranking members. So I just think it speaks well of us, and wanted to get that in on the record.
Well, I just want to say that it's not under my leadership, but it's all of us together have gotten that great score. So thank you all very, very much.
You bet.
And those are my friends who are on the screen as well. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair. I want to congratulate you on your hard work on this chairwoman's mark. And I want to, first of all, thank you for the series of truly excellent hearings and briefings held this year. I think the topics we covered, the briefings held for members, and the witnesses we heard from added great value to our deliberations and ultimately to the bill. And again, I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you for incorporating so many of our shared priorities into this bill. You and I agree on the need for continued investment in biomedical research, public health infrastructure, and preparing the nation for the next pandemic. In fact, as I said in the NIH hearing earlier this year, I actually support the President's higher request for NIH, and I hope we can work together to achieve his recommended level. You and I also agree on the importance of funding special education and programs like TRIO and Gear Up, which help first-generation students complete college and change the trajectory of their lives. Thank you for recognizing the importance of these shared priorities. You've also been fair in including community project funding requested by members on both sides of the aisle. Bringing some control of this funding back into the hands of elected representatives is not without its challenges this year. But you've been more than fair and accommodating to both sides, and I want to thank you for your leadership in that regard. Despite these many areas of agreement, however, I'll be opposing the bill presented today. At the end of May, President Biden sent a $6 trillion budget request to Congress for the fiscal year 2022. The bill presented today mirrors that request closely. Proposing the highest spending levels since World War II, the price tag alone is utterly unrealistic. And while Congress holds the purse strings and is ultimately responsible for providing annual funding for the federal government, the President's budget request reveals his radical priorities and his total disregard for fiscal responsibility. First, instead of focusing on urgent priorities for all Americans, President Biden's budget request elevates controversial policies over pressing needs like strengthening our national defense and bolstering tools to address and manage the crisis at our southern border. In fact, his budget calls for billions of dollars to fund progressive policies like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, and those outlined in his so-called American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, while recommending an effective cut in the funding for our military. With China and Russia growing their militaries by the day, such a move is deeply misguided. Beyond shortchanging our defense and spending big on progressive policies, President Biden expects the American people to foot the bill. His budget proposes a $55 trillion tax increase on American individuals and businesses over the next decade. Moreover, the President endorsed raising the corporate income tax and other taxes targeting individuals, small businesses, and our independent energy industries. Despite promises made on the campaign trail not to raise taxes on those with low and middle income, the President's budget would allow existing tax cuts to expire, which would immediately increase the tax burden on hardworking Americans. As individuals, families, and small businesses continue to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, such levels of unprecedented spending and taxation would only lead to inflation, slowed economic growth, and the highest national debt level in American history. Finally, most egregious in the President's budget request, which I was very disappointed to see also reflected in this bill presented today, is the removal of the Hyde Amendment, which protects life and prevents federal taxpayer-funded abortions. Since it was enacted in 1976, it's estimated that this provision has saved more than 2 million lives while protecting the conscience rights of the great majority of Americans who are opposed to publicly funded abortions for religious, moral, or fiscal reasons. Even when President Biden was serving in the United States Senate, he then expressed his support for inclusion of the Hyde Amendment in appropriations bills and showed support for the provision as recently as just 2 years ago while campaigning for president. Moreover, it's been supported by lawmakers, including every member sitting in this room today, and signed into law by presidents of both parties every year as part of the appropriations process. Madam Chair, you know the Democrats in Congress do not have the majorities capable of passing this bill on their own. In the days and weeks ahead, it's my hope that members on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers can negotiate spending that is reasonable and will not lead to financial disaster. But the first step toward that negotiation will be a full reinstatement of the Hyde Amendment, including conscience protection language added 16 years ago that was also removed from this bill, which protects American doctors, nurses, and other health care professionals from participating in an abortion if they have a moral objection. This is an essential right of every American, and its removal is a danger to us all. I want to point out that even President Biden's budget did not propose removal of that important language, first authored by then Representative David Weldon in 2005. These protections need to be reinstated for this bill to move forward. Quite frankly, everyone in this room knows this bill will never pass the United States Senate without their inclusion, and the majority of the American people support that inclusion. In closing, while the bill does fund many good things, and while I certainly appreciate the openness of the process in which the gentlelady and chairwoman has approached the development of Remark, I'll be opposing the bill today. The price tag is too high, and the bill contains many poison pill policy riders, funding for unauthorized program, and bows to a leftist agenda that's out of step with the American people. But even if all these issues were addressed today, the removal of the language that protects the lives of unborn American children and the rights of Americans to freely exercise their conscience assures the bill will never see the President's desk as written. This decades-old bipartisan compromise must be included before we negotiate on the spending levels and other policy provisions. It's just that simple. I want to thank the chairwoman and her staff again for all the hard work, and I pledge to work with you in good faith as the year continues. We've been at this point before where we disagreed at the beginning, and 6 times we've managed to get to the same place in the end. 4 when I was chairman, 2 when you were just chairman of the subcommittee. So we know how to work together. I would just say I remember in one of our sessions, Madam Chair, when we were dealing with our colleagues on the other side of the rotunda, I was pressing a pretty contentious issue, and one of our friends said to me, Tom, you can have a deal or you can have a fight, but you can't have both. And I think that's where we are. We can have a deal. We know how to do a deal. In my opinion, a deal would mean the defense number would need to go higher, the domestic number would need to go lower, and obviously Hyde needs to come back in. The alternative is a fight, and a fight means a continuing resolution. And that would mean we would end up passing the budget of the last president and the last Congress instead of working together to find common ground. So I pledge to you, my commitment to you as our chairwoman and certainly as my friend and someone I admire, is to try and work with you every step of the way and hope we can reach a deal. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and let me just also recognize folks who are on the screen here, Congresswoman Bustos, Lawrence, Congresswoman Clark, Watson Coleman, and Congresswoman Frankel there. So, and just want to acknowledge you're in the room here, so thank you. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Does any member wish to offer an amendment to the bill? Seeing no additional members seeking recognition, I recognize the gentlelady from California for a motion, and I ask for your support for this bill.
Madam Chair, I move to favorably report the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriations Act 2022 to the full committee.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
No. No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. You can hear me twice. Technology. Okay. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be permitted to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and report just approved. Seeing no objection, so ordered. I've been asked to remind all members to leave their copies of the report and the detail table in the room. The committee is circulating the report this afternoon, so you will have a print including the detail table sometime later today. And this is like if you tear off the spindle or the tag on the mattresses and so forth. We're going to come find you. So anyway, without objection. Before we say without objection, we will have a debate, a lively debate, and a vigorous discussion on the issues on which we may disagree, but we are we're going to do that in a civil way, and just be conscious of one another's viewpoints, and we will, listen here and help to try to affect the outcome. So, and I know that we will do that together. So, without objection, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.